Hello, my name is David Bryan, and this is Curiosity Invited, a podcast inspired by endless curiosity. Tune in for an open-minded conversation about interesting and important things. Welcome, everybody. Welcome to Curiosity Invited. My name is David Bryan, and today I have the great pleasure of speaking with Robert Ochs. So Bob and I met when we were in graduate school and at UCLA in the Department of Kinesiology, believe it or not. And then after that, Bob's had a storied life. He's got his master's in, counseling? Master's in counseling? I know you have an LCSW.
Clinical social work.
Yeah. So the master's was in clinical social work. Got it. Okay. Got it. And he's worked in the criminal justice system since 1979, locally, state level, and federal level. His work was predominantly in forensic mental health. He trained at LA County Probation Camp, worked in juvenile delinquency at the California Youth Authority, and became a licensed clinician in 1983, and then began private practice. He then transitioned into the world of county probation, and first as a deputy chief, and then from 2005 to 2016, Bob was the chief of probation officer in Sonoma County. So thank you. Thanks. First of all, it's good to see you after years of not seeing you, and it's good. Thank you for being willing to come and chat with me about something I know little about. And you know a lot, which is great. Yeah, I'm going back to school, and this is it.
It's great to be here. It's great to see you, your smiling mug again after so long for not, and have an opportunity to talk about stuff which I love.
Well, so one of the things that was that was stimulated by some of the thoughts that you and I had sort of exchanged back and forth. You were the chief probation officer, and I know very little about what that actually entails, but so we'll definitely talk about that. But it occurred to me as I was reading through some of the stuff. You have a background in mental health, right? Mental health counseling, and you're the chief probation officer. I'm assuming, and this could be wrong, but I'm assuming that in other places, not necessarily in California, but other places around the country, the chief probation officer may come from criminal enforcement, may come from a variety of different fields. So if the person in charge thinks about the mental health, or at least, those are at least in part, those are the lenses that person looks through, looks at someone's mental health, that's a very different take on somebody who's been, a cop working his way up from a beat cop to the administration, to where sometimes the attitude is, or the orientation is about controlling dangerous people, keeping them off the street, keeping other people safe, etc. Not that you're not considering those things, but, a big part of the lenses you look through were from your orientation. So I'm really curious about that. And if that's true, if my assumption is true, and I know I'm speaking a lot, so I'm going to make a mess out of this, and luckily you're here to straighten it out. But if my assumption is true that it somehow means a different thing, how is it different when the person who is sitting in the position that you were in for all those years is a cop, right? Not that he's a cop, but so that was a lot. And luckily you're a smart guy, so you'll make sense of all that.
That's a lot, and it's a fascinating way to begin. Great question. I love the approach of the big picture perspective that you're this up. And it is a combination of an openness in Sonoma County and the people there to go in that direction, of the former chief to bring me on as deputy chief. Some of it was she didn't have anybody else from inside the department, and I happened to be in the place. And I was somewhat unique in mental health field and having that criminal justice background. I had a predominantly working with offenders.
You froze a little bit when you said I had predominantly working with a background.
Right. Am I okay now?
Yeah.
Am I good? So predominantly working with very seriously ill, but also people who have committed very serious crimes. And the perspective of forensic mental health is similar in my mind to probation, and I can talk about that if you want. But I think it's a confluence of things. And again, big picture, systems, societies go through large cycles over the years.
Yeah.
In terms of crime, you think about 80s, 90s, there was a lot more crime, concern about crime, harsh sentencing laws, 3 strikes. And then things started to change around 2000 and early 2000. So there was more interest in maybe rehabilitation. There was more research coming out on what works with offenders, whether or not they're mentally ill enough. It's just the whole notion that we can help people, that we can make a difference, that we're not just there to, the old mantra was nail them, tail them, and jail them, right? At different points, that's kind of what probation was. But it began to change, and we had so much more information coming in, and I think it was a confluence of those things. It's such a great point. There was one other chief in the state, Napa County, who was a licensed clinician, and
oh wow! So really, you were, and that was a rare thing.
Yes. And when I got hired as deputy chief, there was a lot of suspicion by the staff.
Everybody suddenly started to look like those things outside the used car. It was like, what's going on?
That's exactly right. Who's this guy?
What is this?
Yes, and what's he going to do? And so there was a lot of skepticism, I would say. But the beautiful thing was the people there at many different levels, and especially the staff, they gave me an opportunity to prove myself.
Yeah.
Say, all right, what's your take? And the reality is there's such overlap in these fields that I'm not very far over towards the social work perspective. I'm certainly not a cop, and I'm not there. And you think about these worlds. You laid it out in really nice ways. Now you've got that range from social work to cop, and we see as probation officers, we're our unique blend, but it's kind of in that middle realm, and there's a big overlap. And then within the state, every chief in the state is trying to figure out what's the right balance in my department, right? To be more rehab oriented versus law enforcement.
Mm-hmm. Well, I was just going to say, you pointed out, well, you used the word cycles, and I think that that's true. I mean, I remember when I was in law school reading criminal law, especially, the reason for punishment, incarceration or whatever it was, the consequence after conviction, there used to be a deterrence, right? Well, specific deterrence, we're going to deter this person, or we're going to deter people like this person, general deterrence. And then there was rehab, right? Well, we're going to rehabilitate this person. And then there was, retribution. Like, we're going after this person that, we're punishing. We're punishing, and we're keeping people safe. Right. And there's this social movement of, during certain periods of time, somehow rehab captures people's imagination, and at other people's time, and, I can ask you where are we heading? But, all people want to do is get those guys off the street.
That's right.
So that's interesting. So the person that hired you, the person that brought you in as the deputy, but that person, what was her orientation? Their orientation.
It was a she. She was my predecessor as chief, and she came up through the probation department. Started off working at the juvenile hall, worked her way up.
Oh.
She probation, some background in administration of justice, something. But
Yeah.
she was very open and interested in what's new and what can work and how can we help people. But she was no nonsense. She was tough. It was
Yeah.
like, accountability. Her husband worked for the sheriff for many years. So, the law enforcement community. But she was open to it. And
Yeah.
again, if she had, I joke with her, of course, say, well, you were desperate. I mean, if she would have had, somebody, ideally, you have somebody in your department who has worked their way up, right? And knows people, knows probation, them, you trust them, you've seen them
Sure.
for decades.
Right.
And then there also wasn't anybody in the state who applied that she was comfortable with.
Right.
And so she took a flyer, man. She took a big chance, and I took a big chance. And then, so that was as deputy chief. But then 4 years later, when she retired, was the opening for chief, and I put in for that. And then that's a whole other big deal, big process. And the appointment of the chief is really interesting, unique kind of thing. We can get into that or not, whatever you think.
Where does probation fit in the system, right? Because it's like, you're not the person on the street investigating the crime and searching for the dastardly person who did it, and you're not in the you're not in the prosecutor's office, I think, right? So you're not trying to decide, yes, there's enough to put this person away and let's do it, or just do something. You're somewhere in the middle, and then you're somewhere afterwards. So what is where does it all fit? Where does it all fit?
Great. I'll try to put this together, and you're going to see as we go through this probably that I have great reverence for probation. I mean, you're going to, I just have such a probation-centric perspective on the world, the value of probation. But basically, in the criminal justice system, you've got the first responders, police, sheriff, kind of thing, who arrest somebody, bring them in, jail. Then probation actually may have a role very early on in being involved with a bail review and seeing if somebody, before there's a trial.
You mean before, yeah.
Beforehand, we may get involved in that and assessment and letting them out or not. And then actually even we may be supervising them on pre-trial before the whole process. So while they're out, not gone through trial yet, we have a pre-trial process, which is a big, big deal. We're involved with that oftentimes. And then, yes, you have probation is one of 4 county departments, 5 if you include the court, that are involved in the criminal justice system. So you got the district attorney, elected DA of the county, prosecutor. You've got the public defender. The person may have their own private defense, but you got the public defender. That's a county department. And you have the sheriff's department. And they run the jail. And probation. So probation may come in early, bail, pre-trial. And then if once it goes through a court process or there's admission of guilt, prosecution, if somebody is convicted of a crime, in particular, somebody's convicted of a felony in California, before their sentencing, and this is a little known piece, before their sentencing, that case is referred to the probation department. So before it goes to the judge to say, what do we do with this person? It goes to probation department. And so, for example, I had a team of what we call investigators. These are investigators who investigate not the original crime only, but what happened in the crime, the facts of the case, the facts of the offender, their history, the victim, all the specifics of the case, and then the law. What does the law say about this crime and what can happen with this? And the purpose of that pre-sentencing report goes to the prosecution, the defense, and the court. And we say whether this person is eligible for probation or not. And then we make a recommendation. Right. What should the sentence be? And
wait, the sentence could be you make a recommendation about it. It could include incarceration.
Absolutely.
Yeah. Oh, I
And,
see.
and we may say, probation may be precluded by law. You can't give them probation. The most serious crime,
Yeah.
attempted murder, not going to get probation.
Sure.
We say, so you can't. We may say you can, but boy, this person has failed on probation a number of times before. It's a very serious crime, and there's nothing to indicate that this person is going to benefit from probation.
And would your office recommend a length of sentence or no?
Yeah, within the standards that the penal code provides. Wow. Oftentimes it says 2, 4, 6 years, and so and then we would recommend oftentimes a period of confinement in jail and then probation.
And then probation afterwards.
That's right.
Yeah.
And then we would also, what's happening more and more as I talk a little bit about the research that's coming out showing what works with folks. We talk about what the risks and needs are of this person, and we lay out what should happen with this person on probation to make them less likely to recidivate, and what we're going to do, the level of supervision that would be appropriate. You might have risk-based caseloads. This person is a low risk to reoffend, high risk to reoffend, and these are the things that we can help with. Substance abuse treatment, mental health treatment, domestic violence. There's a batterers program for DV, felony probation.
And are there people in the probation departments are there mental health counselors in the probation department, or is that something you would say this person would need to benefit from, or would benefit from blah, 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 and they get it elsewhere?
Another good question is combination. So the best treatment, the best way to work with very seriously mentally ill offenders, or there's a number of things, but an important piece is to have a specialty probation officer who knows how to deal with this population. So it's not a one-off person who has a lot of needs and this crazy illness and I don't know what to do with it, I just want to pass them on. It's somebody who has smaller caseload and they have almost exclusively mentally ill offenders. They're trained in it. They have a sensitivity to it. They have a rehab focus, and it's clear that they do much better.
And would that have been something? Could you have gotten a job doing that with your mental health background? Like, would they have hired someone like you for that role, or other?
Yeah,
other
some people.
Yeah.
Some probation officers have mental health backgrounds. Absolutely. And they do that. Some POs become especially trained in that. But in addition to that, going back to your question, that specialty mental health probation officer would also oftentimes refer that person out for mental health counseling through private practitioner or the mental health department in the county, and work together with them.
Got it.
Yeah, and we have a day reporting center where they would get a lot of these services. So yes, another great question. It's that combination.
And how, there's TV, right? And then, like, how cooperative and collaborative are the various departments? Don't name names, but are the various departments both? You can talk about where you work, but you can also talk about things that you've heard elsewhere. But is there a basic distrust? Where the cops distrust the probation? They're always just looking to get somebody out of it, or prosecutors, or because there's always that. There's certainly TV, but I'm wondering if it's a much more collaborative process.
Well, again, it's almost like when an attorney would say, it depends. It varies, right? And some counties differ from others that way. And it also, like you said earlier, the person at the top oftentimes will set the tone, right? And there's a new person at the top that can change. Happened to be Sonoma County talks a good game about being very collaborative, and in general, I think that's the case. I was very fortunate. People work together. You also have private victims, and you have personalities, and you have concern. You say, I've got limited budget. I can't help you with that. What can I do? Sorry. So there's definitely battles, especially when we had criminal justice realignment and we had a huge influx of new offenders and new responsibilities and a bunch of money trying to deal with that. It was like there was some tension, I would say, in particular with the district attorney's office, that particular person, and some fun stories with that. But we eventually, if people are adults, you leave the ego out to the extent that you can. You try to work together for the betterment of the community. I mean, that's what, trying
Yeah.
to public safety and health and recidivism reduction. And
Yeah.
these are obviously important issues for every community, and they vary.
It's a really, it's a, you could go so many different ways, right? Like you just said, we try to work better for the good of the community. And there are numerous instances, you may have run into this in private practice, depending upon the population you were dealing with, is like where you were working for the well-being of the individual, right? That was the primary. I don't know about you, but the primary is like, I'm doing what's best for this person. I'm not ignoring the community, but my primary responsibility is this person's well-being, as opposed to, and everybody's got their different orientation. So, somebody wants them locked away, and somebody recommends they only be locked away for this period of time, and everybody, it's that same question. It's really the first question. It's like, depending upon somebody's orientation, like what lenses they're seeing through, you get a very different, or you could imagine getting a very different take. Who makes this decision ultimately? The judge?
The decision on what the sentence is?
What the sentence is and what should happen afterwards, and or is, once the sentence is delivered, the person's in, let's say that person's incarcerated for a period of whatever, not to exceed blah blah blah, then obviously the criminal justice, the prison system is, or the jail system is somewhere involved, and then they're about to get out, and then probation sort of comes back, or are they involved with somebody in prison, and the judge, or is the judge still involved, or no, how long gone, done, paid your debt to society?
It depends on where they go. If they're sent to prison is a state function, and
Yeah.
they're saying the counties, we're washing our hands, right, for at least temporarily. We're sending you to prison. You go to the California Department
Yeah.
of Rehabilitation. Probation's not involved at that point. The judge is not involved. It's possible that make it back involved later.
There's no probation involved? Not, you mean no county probation, or you mean no, there's really no probation?
No county probation, no probation.
Got it.
In prison, what happens is after prison, you get parole, which is often mistaken for probation. So that after a prison, you get parole. And there's some mix up between the two because of realignment that happened a dozen years ago, and some prisoners get paroled under the supervision of probation. It gets confused. Basically, it's like county probation, state prison, and parole. If the person goes to jail and then probation, the judge is still going to have involvement. Probation starts to get involved, and so they have their sentence, and then we will have responsibility for supervision once they're in the community, and put them on, hopefully, it is accountability, and it's rehab or opportunity, kind of what we say. But the other piece that you mentioned, really interesting about, is your client the individual, or is it broader than that? If you're a mental health practitioner, and certainly when I was, we focus on that. It's like you're thinking you're just working with this one person. You're figuring out what's best for this person. That's where your focus is. As you get into forensics, forensic mental health, there's a responsibility because you're talking about somebody who has committed a crime, and there's some risk of future crime. And so your client, in my mind, has always been broader than that, right? Your client becomes the community. At what level are you thinking, I want what's good for you, but It's good for you. It's going to hurt our community. That's
Right.
not okay.
Yeah, what's good for you is that steak dinner. What's bad for the guy who owns the restaurant is you
That's
just
right.
stole
That's
it.
right. Yeah, that's right.
Yeah.
Just inject one thing in there. When you were talking about who has a different role, in the system, it's forensic, because I think forensic comes from the word debate, right? So you have the DA one side, you have the defense, and trying the case before the trier of fact, the judge. So this is a debate, right? And the DA said, this is what went on. And the public said, no, the guy's not so bad, and you got it wrong, whatever. Probation's role, the way I like to see it, is as the honest broker. We come in, the DA and PD never liked it when I said that, of course, but we come in, we investigate the facts of the case, and we say, yeah, you've heard those two, but this is what really happened. And this is, these are the facts. We're the honest broker, and this is what we recommend happen.
I could imagine them hating that, as if somehow they haven't investigated the facts of the case, and they're not honest. They're skewed by their whatever. Yeah,
that's right. They have a certain perspective.
I'm sure that made you a loved darling of the. You mentioned it a few times. Mentally ill patients mentally ill offenders, prisoners, etc. Like, how prevalent is that? Like, is that big? I mean,
yeah, it's big, and it's gotten bigger over the last 30, 40 years. If I can, when I talk about this, oftentimes I'll have PowerPoints and charts and stuff like that. So I'm flying without that stuff now, but I did pull out one or two charts. Can I show one in particular?
Sure. Yeah.
See, if you can see this, it's chart.
It's pretty clear.
The line that's going over and then down is showing the number of mentally ill folks in hospital beds.
Wow.
Right. And then the other one is showing the number of mentally ill folks in prisons.
And what is the number on the right? The y-axis is per what?
This is
per
100,000.
Yeah.
So the number in prison going up, and this is about in the late 70s and the 80s.
Yeah. Hold it up there again. Hold it up just so, and I'll put it up on the screen.
Yeah, it is such a dramatic part.
It speaks pretty loud, doesn't it?
And if you think about, again, the big cycles that have gone on, there was this movement of deinstitutionalization back in the 70s. Reagan, if you remember that.
I remember, emptied out the mental institutions.
State hospitals, that's right. And some of it was, he said, well, people saying they're better if we treat these folks locally, you know what you're doing, closer to home. And that's all true. But a lot of it was he needed to save money, he had budget problems. And so the notion was, all right, let's close the state hospitals and let's allow these folks to be in community mental health centers and closer to home, closer to family. They're your folks, you know what to do, and we'll send you money to deal with all that. Well, that all happened except for the part about sending money.
Yeah, right, exactly.
That didn't happen.
Checks in the mail.
That's right. That's right. And so there's other things that went on with this, but it's no accident that this is such an important piece of the criminal justice system. It's because we don't turn people away. We can't. They come to us, they end up in the system. They're not getting the housing and services and treatment they need. One last piece about with the homeless problem, the homeless, mentally ill, you see so much more in that area. It's not a coincidence this stuff has happened.
Yeah. These are people who they're mentally ill, and yet, they're not at the level of not responsible for their actions. And so what are prisons like, if it's a significant chunk of a population, and does it skew in certain directions? Are there like clusters and most people in prison, it's emotionally disturbed. Most people, if you're looking for groups of, you know what I mean? Is there a clustering of what the problems are?
Well, You wouldn't say most, but the preponderance of the serious mental illness is significantly higher in prison. So I think broadly in the general population, something like 5% have a very serious mental illness at some point. And inside prisons is closer to 15 to 20%. And then other mental illnesses are very significant
Yeah.
inside. And then what goes along with it is 3/4 of the folks with mental illness in prison have substance abuse problems. So that is so prevalent, and that is such a difficult problem. So that's what when we say forensic mental health, mentally ill offenders, when somebody comes into jail, right? Jail is a terrible place,
Ugh.
right? Sometimes it's needed for even for somebody who's needed obviously for safety for somebody, or it's needed for somebody who is very mentally ill to help contain them, short term. But it's a terrible place, and people who have a mental illness and struggle and have these issues, it can make things worse. If the jail, if the community, if the prison knows what to do, they can do a lot of good things. But it's tough. It's a tough problem, and it's very tough for the administrators of the programs, the facilities, the prison. Think about that. You're dealing with very
Oh,
violent people inside. You need to control things, and then you have this person who is suffering with this. Here's what happened in California, and folks have heard about this over the years. But in about 1990, 91, not too long after you see the increase in prison population of the 80s,
yeah.
there was a class action lawsuit went to federal court saying the provision of healthcare and mental health care for prisoners in California did not meet the U.S. Constitution, violated the
Right.
eighth cruel and unusual punishment.
Right.
And this was in large part due to overcrowding because of a federal law. It said, we are going to the court. Said, yeah, there's a big problem here. And the court said, we don't want to do this, but California, you're doing such a terrible job with this that we are going to force you to release 20, 30, 40,000 inmates if you don't fix this. And you imagine that, a federal court coming in and wanting to tell a state prison could be going to release 30 or 40,000 offenders. And the
Wow.
enormous, that many offenders. California is so big, its population reached 170,000, the prison population at one point, I think maybe 2006, something like that. And the release of that many offenders, that's 30, 40,000 offenders. That's more than the entire prison population of about 40 states in the country. Right? It's as if you took their entire prison system and said, man, we're going to close the prisons and put you out here. And so California was struggling, trying to hold off the federal courts, trying to improve the treatment of mental health. And this went through a long process, eventually ended up in the U.S. Supreme Court. And then there was big changes in the laws in California, and prison population decreased. And a lot of folks are now in the counties, for county responsible.
And was the county? Well, no, because the county was that's the prison system. That's the state. So, but was your department involved in the? I mean, it would not make sense. I mean, if it was not your department, it ought to be people who were like what you did, right? That like, who do we? If we have to let somebody go, how do we pick How do we pick the least risk?
Yeah.
It would just seem like it's right up your line, up your alley.
Probation was intimately involved in part of why the prison system was so dysfunctional and so awful, and also involved in the solution in helping it out. The counties and states are intimately involved. Everybody in prison has been sentenced by a county. They've committed the crime in a county.
In a county.
Come back. 90% of prisoners come back. But what was going on at the same time when you have that prison population going up and the laws being very harsh was probation. This is going on the juvenile system too, but we're talking about the adult system now. The funding for probation wasn't there didn't have the ability to have enough probation officers, didn't have any treatment. So basically, you might have one probation officer sometimes for hundreds and hundreds of offenders, and you can't do anything. And so what causes the prison increase? The admissions in prison come from new sentences. They come from a parole violator. Somebody gets parole because and the recidivism rate there was 70%, but 40% of the admissions, almost half of the admissions, were from probation failures. Somebody gets sentenced to probation. That's right. Somebody gets sentenced to probation in the county, and they either get a new law violation or they commit what we call a technical violation, meaning they don't do something like show up for treatment or show up to see the PO, something that wouldn't get them in trouble if they weren't on probation, but they have to follow these rules. They keep violating probation. The county says, all right, I've had enough. I don't have the ability to handle you, and you're screwing up. We're going to send you to prison. So prison population goes up until really there was a seminal piece of legislation in 2009 that changed this system dramatically. And then another one a couple of years later. So
it was to explain. And how did it change it dramatically?
So probation system doesn't have the funding, and the state has this massive population problem. And probation knew that we had done a bunch of stuff in the juvenile system by in some funding, state and federal grants. We're able to provide upstream intervention, preventative programs, treatment, more and more information coming out saying, if you do these things, you can help offenders. You can stop them from going back to the state. So probation came up with this proposal for an incentive-based piece of legislation, really wonderful public policy. And it says, look, if you help us somehow, give us funding to work with these probationers, we know we can do good stuff with them. We have the research, we have evidence from juveniles, we know we can do it. We don't have any way to do this. Probation wasn't getting any funding. And if we do that, we will send less to you, right? Prison population won't keep getting all this, right? They'll save money.
Right.
And if you share some of that with us, we can kind of do this together. And that's exactly what it was. Piece of legislation called SB 678, and it was a dramatic change. It provided funding for probation departments to have more POs and to have more programming and all the things, risk assessments, and do so many different things that we knew would make a difference if we had the resources. And over the next couple of years, there was a dramatic decrease in the percent of probation failures.
Yeah.
And it was beautiful to watch. And then it wasn't bringing the state prison population down far enough. So the Jerry Brown came up with this thing called realignment that really changed the laws. And
yeah, you'd mentioned who was eligible for probation?
Who was eligible for prison? Basically, they say, oh
wow,
you're going to preclude a whole class of offenders from being sent to prison.
Right.
You're keeping them locally.
Right.
You're keeping them locally, and we're gonna give you some funding for that, but you can't send them to prison anymore.
So what's an example? I mean, what are those kinds of things? Drugs, marijuana?
Certainly some level of selling drugs, but there's the penal code lays out what are called serious felonies, violent felonies, and sex offenses, and those can continue to come to prison. And those that are not that, things that before, you do a second-degree burglary or something, or you do a theft of a certain amount of money, right? Theft is nonviolent. Some counties and some crimes say, we've tried you before, and I don't want to do this anymore, and we're done with you. Send you to prison. Things for which people could get sent to prison or stay on probation. Now, if you cannot any longer send this person to prison, you're just keeping them locally.
That must have made people feel really warm and fuzzy. I mean, I could just imagine that in some circles is like, wait, what?
Exactly right. It was the build up to this, the work around it, the work with Governor Brown at the time trying to figure it out. With probation was involved, sheriffs, police chiefs, DAs. It was like, oh my God, you're going to send us 30,000, 40,000 people that previously were being sent to prison. We're going to be responsible for. They're going into our jails and they're going to be supervised by probation. You're kidding, right? You're crazy. So, Jerry,
they could go to jail. They couldn't go to prison. Is that right?
That's right. Jail is the county. That's right.
Okay.
Yeah, they could be incarcerated,
Right.
but not in the state prison. But
Right.
Jerry Brown, the way that played out, Jerry Brown got elected in 2010. And before he even took office, he saw what was coming in terms of that federal court lawsuit. It was heading to the Supreme Court. And while he fought it, and we certainly law enforcement folks didn't want this huge change to happen, something had to happen. So Jerry Brown came up with this plan. It was a kind of thing, this will take a couple of years, but if you let us do this, we will slowly decrease the population of the prisons. Probation departments and sheriffs will be much more predominantly responsible for these offenders that used to be sent to the state prison, and the prison population will go down. And in fact, that happened.
And that did, yeah.
That dramatic over a couple of years, and then there was some other legislative changes, Proposition 47, which changed the punishment for certain crimes. But yes, it happened dramatically. The population, I think CDCR maxed out about 170,000. During COVID, it was down to about 100,000. Now it's maybe a little over 100,000, I think, but dramatic difference. And the provision of healthcare and mental health care is much improved, although there is still a special master involved overseeing the provision of mental health care in California state prisons. That's still being fought out. This is 30 years later that
wow.
That case is still going on. So anyway, I don't know if I got too far.
No, not at all. It's now, really what you've done is me. I've got so many questions floating around. Yeah. You made reference before to the probation officers, probation departments saying, look, we know what can work. So give us support to be able to do this. What are some of those things, and what does work look like? What does that mean? It means this person won't go back to jail, or won't recommit a crime. But and what are some of those things?
Great. So it's recidivism reduction. That's really the holy grail for probation.
Yeah.
Right?
Yeah.
We can help somebody not commit a new crime. Public safety.
Yeah. You screwed up. You learned your lesson. Good. Woo. All right. We're good.
We're helping regenerate a contributing member of society, preventing future. So that's our holy grail. So how do you get there? What works? The model is almost like the medical model. It's assessment, diagnosis, treatment. And the assessment is the first thing, and you assess for risk. So what is the risk? You can do an actuarial assessment that are getting better and better over the years. And every probation department now does that. So is this person a high risk to reoffend, moderate risk, low risk to reoffend? And then what the research says is the resources should follow risk. So that means really you want to take your lower risk offenders and you think, okay, these guys are in pretty good shape. And you say, well, maybe we'll give them a bunch of treatment because they're going to be likely to do it. But it turns out that if you put in the low risk offender in with the high risk offender, the low risk offender gets worse. the recidivism rate goes up. And it's because the high risk offender doesn't tend to learn from the low risk. It's the low risk that learns, and then you take the low risk out of their supportive communities, their jobs, maybe family. So first thing you do is you separate low risk, and you maybe put into some kind of stuff. They're going to be mostly okay by themselves. You need to put most of your resources towards the highest risk. And what do? You assess for what the criminogenic risks and needs are. There are certain things that are the drivers of criminal behavior. We know that now. I mean, this is such a well-studied thing, and people probably aren't aware of it because, like in so much of probation, we fly below the radar. But there are like 8 things that are the really well-shown criminogenic risk needs. They're the drivers of criminal activity. And the top 4, the most important, are the antisocial things, antisocial thinking, antisocial values, antisocial friends, hang out with them, and then an antisocial history if you have that. And then the next four are family problems, employment problems, substance abuse, and low, not a healthy use of leisure time, right? So not productive use of
Right.
that. So interestingly, it's a good example of when you think about people talk about, well, what do you do with the offenders? Well, I work on their self-esteem. There's this well-known researcher, kind of passed away recently, named Ed Latessa, who used to evaluate programs, and you go into a place and you tell these stories. You go, I go in there and I talk to people. I say, well, what kind of stuff you do here with offenders? We got this program here. You got these guys. What are you doing? Well, we work on their self-esteem. And what happens when you work on offenders' self-esteem and you work on none of those criminogenic risks and need, you get an offender who feels better about themselves. And you're not going to decrease recidivism. You have to deal
He's
with
a really good bowler.
There you go. But you have to work on those criminogenic risk needs, or you will not get the reduction in recidivism. So those are the things that we know. And then the programming, you may have heard of, there's a particular kind of mental health care, and that is cognitive behavioral treatment.
Yeah.
That is work. And that's an umbrella term with many different programs come into that, but that works in general. You put offenders in those kind of programs and you deal with the other risks and needs specifically they have. And when you do that, it's hard to do. It's hard to turn a program into an evidence-based program and maintain fidelity. But if you do it, you can reduce recidivism dramatically.
Okay, so what are the numbers about? I don't mean you have to pin it down to the decimal point, but recidivism is high. Yeah. So
recidivism is high. The best programs seem to show a 30 to 40% reduction in recidivism from what it was without the program.
Right.
So what was numbers before? It depending upon the state and the level you're looking at, the recidivism rate was often 60, 70%.
Right.
At state level. You don't get to state prison, you don't get to felony probation accidentally, capriciously. You have committed a serious offense. It's not like people think, well, there's people in state prison for marijuana possession. It's not like that. These are serious offenses, and folks who have tough history, a lot of antisocial features. May not be a full-on psychopath, of course, or antisocial personality disorder, but
it's such a hard. I mean, I'm just imagining. It's my reference is for a lot of things is school, right? I mean, so it's just kids do stupid. That's their job. Kids do stupid things. I mean, I used to say, well, look, better that they do it now than when the consequence is a federal indictment. So, yeah, I don't want them to do that. I don't want her to do that. But that's in some ways, that's part of the learning process. And the other thing I would say was, well, it took a person a while to get to be who he or she is. So it's probably going to take a little time for them to get to be somebody else. So it's a process. Well, some people have no patience for that at all. Kick the fucker out. Right. Well, in your case, it's kick the fucker in. Right. Right. So, but yeah, is there a lot of tension about that? I mean, I could just imagine, somebody does what you called before a sort of like a technical violation of their probation terms. And, there's always circumstances. So maybe the circumstances were mostly brought about by that individual, or maybe the circumstances were brought out by circumstances. And I, maybe it's because of the people I've bumped into. So many people was like, what? Fuck them, broke the rules, goes back. as opposed to, well, this is part of this person becoming a different person. It takes a little time. And the tension between those things must be, I'm assuming it must be intense. So
yes, and it's different in every county. You got different politics in every county, right? The way the chief in Kings County in the Central Valley is going to be seeing a particular offense or technical violation is different than Santa Cruz or Sonoma County, right? It's a different world, and yes, there's a fair amount of tension, and there's tension. You asked before between probation and law enforcement sometimes. And sometimes between probation and human services. And we have different perspectives on these things. The research says if you want to do better with decreasing recidivism, and again, that's our holy grail.
That's the goal.
It may be an emotional thing. It's like, screw them, send them back, whatever, kind of thing. But if you step back and go, what does research say? How do we best do this for our community? The hybrid probation officer who really sees that dual role of finding the balance between, yes, I supervise you and I'm going to hold you accountable, and there's going to be a line here, and when you cross it, there's going to be a consequence. On the other hand, I want you to succeed, and I'm going to give you opportunities, and I'm going to work with you. So where is that balance? If the officer gets too social work oriented, or if the officer gets oriented, success goes down. I mean, it's so cool to see that, because that's, it's why I like probation, because it's that balance, that moderate, that sensible kind of thing, from my perspective. But so it's nice to see the research on that.
Do you ever, I'm going back to that same, it's probably silly, but that one of the best things about working in education, lots of bad things about working in education, but I mean, I loved it. But one of the best things was the, 20 years later, you bump into somebody and they say, do you remember when you said this thing in class that changed my life, whatever it was. And, or it's the gratuitous, I just want to say, thank you. I was an asshole when I was in school, but I really appreciate it now. Is there ever that element in any of the work that you've done where it actually was personal, from offender, somebody in the system, to somebody helping them try to stay out of the system? Or it's just never that way?
Oh, absolutely. No. You don't get into the system capriciously. There's a lot of early damage, but there's no question most of the kids that get into the juvenile hall, and probation runs the juvenile hall, they don't come back. And then even folks who come several times, most people are not going to end up deep into the adult system. So you certainly have that from kids, and you have that, no question. A lot of most officers are going to have success stories. The numbers aren't 80%.
Yeah.
And it's wonderful. It's what,
totally.
I mean, you do the work to try to help. You want to help me. You want to help your community be safe, and you also you get a thrill from somebody succeeding. Yes, and they come back, and you have people come back and work in the probation department.
That's pretty great.
It's so cool. That's
pretty great. Yeah. And so you worked there. You worked within the California Youth.
Well, that's different. That's different. So the California Youth Authority is the state prison for kids.
Right.
Like you have the state prison.
Different from programs that you did in the county for kids?
Yes. County, in the same way, in the adult system, you have the county jail, and then if you get sentenced to prison, you go to the state. In the county system, you have a county institution, which is the juvenile hall, run by the probation department. It's the
juvenile hall, different from California Youth Authority, whatever.
That's right. When you have somebody at the county level, juvenile hall, sometimes the crime is so serious, and He said, we can't help you anymore. We don't have the resources. Now, what's going on is the California Youth Authority, Department of Juvenile Justice, is being eliminated, going out of business in the next couple of months.
Because kids have gotten so much better.
Yeah, well, we like to think that we've done a lot better. The population, when I used to work there way back 30, 40 years ago, was 10,000. In the past few years, it's been under 1,000.
Wow.
Wonderful. Wonderful, right? Some of that is realignment of the juvenile system, law changes, but some of it is the big cycles of criminality over the years. Crime is on a very historic, long-term decrease in the last few years, especially since COVID and George Floyd thing. There's been some upticks in a lot of the unrest and protest. It just
wait, you need to say that again. Just because it is so not the message that gets played in the. So we are in the middle of, or in some point in a massive reduction of crime.
Yes. And you might remember back in the late 80s, early 90s, when there was a federal crime bill, there was talk about the super predators, juveniles coming up, and we have to make all these laws, and we have to build these prisons, and we have to just get rid of them. And as a matter of fact, at that point, there was an important piece of research, probably 70s or 80s, this sociologist who did some research way before that stuff that I told you, what we know that works.
Yeah.
Some piece of research. He said, well, we've looked at all the different ways we've tried to help offenders, and you know what? Nothing works. Nothing works. We can't help them. So, and though that was consistent with the thinking at the time, which was lock them up, throw away the key.
Right.
And over time, research was saying, you know what? That's not right. Some things do work. Some things do work. And more research over time was showing some of the things I talked about. But at the same time, crime was high. People were feeling punitive. But then it's been dropping for decades. And criminologists have not been able to fully explain why. Some of it is better policing. Some of it is more and more research known on what works, upstream kind of stuff.
Mm-hmm.
The last few years, we're seeing change, and it's really easy to lie with statistics, as you know. Old book,
Sure.
lie with.
Yeah, absolutely.
What we want, you say, well, we don't like this liberal DA, so we're going to show you what the crime stats are, and all that's distorted, and it really it's not easy to set out, but the long-term trend is, it was down.
Wow.
Pretty cool. And so, the Youth Authority, the Department of Juvenile Justice,
Closing it down.
They're closing it down. Now,
what happens to those people?
We don't like that. Probation doesn't like that, because we think that we have done a great job of diverting and taking care of kids who we can, and keeping them at the county level, and not sending them away to the state, and doing good stuff locally. But there are some kids that are so damaged,
Mm-hmm.
so dangerous, have such great needs. We don't have those resources, especially if you think about, think about sex offenders, you think about arsonists, you think about mentally ill kids, or somebody committed a double homicide. You're going to keep them locally. You keep them locally, in the community for 10 years, 15 years. So the probation chief, wanted the state to keep it open for just this, the small number, for the very difficult ones. And Newsom said, no, we're shutting it down. So we fought that. Now probation is working on, how do we take care of this? So, for example, some counties might have one or two sex offenders. They don't have a way to deal with a sex offender program. So maybe we'll build one or two in the state, and then counties from all over can send their kids to a county program instead of sending. It's kind of like a consortium working together to solve that. But it's very different than it was. Numbers and the way that we work with kids, and we help them, but there's there's always going to be the need for some kids who have to be, other kids have to be protected from. We
Yeah.
have to, and they have such great needs.
Oh my God. I don't know. You probably don't. How would you? Uh, Camp Gonzales in Malibu, right in the Malibu Hills.
I know it well because
You
that's
do?
what I did. I did my internship there in 1979.
Oh, yeah.
Yeah, I know.
Well, we meaning people affiliated with the school and associated with the school with my school created a program, and the county put it in. It was the New Roads. I don't remember what it was called, but it wasn't education. It was after school, so it was poetry. It was counsel. Sitting around and literally sitting around and talking, passing the talking piece. Very Southern California, arts programs, film programs, and it was dramatic. And actually, some of the kids, with mixed success. Some of the kids, when they got out, we were able to put them in the school, give them financial aid, let them be in the school. And as I say,
New roads or crossroads.
New roads. Yeah. And, with mixed success, sometimes it worked just really well and sometimes it didn't. So, but it was quite amazing. So, do you miss it? Because there's something really juicy about.
It's juicy, man.
There's so many things to like. There's so many. Nothing fits neatly in a slot, except perhaps if you do this, this will be better than if you do that. Right. But other than that, there's so many things at stake. There's so many. You mentioned it a second ago, right? The politics change over time, and the politics change from place to place, and now anything that's political is insane, right? It's like it's not even issue based. It's like if you think this, we think that, and if you think that, we think this. So it's so juicy. Yeah.
I'm sorry.
No. I'm really wondering, do you miss it? Do you like? I mean, you don't necessarily miss the stuff that made your hair gray, but
there you go. My hair's turning gray. Yeah. So it's juicy. It's rich. It was a fantastic fit for me. I got lucky to end up there.
Yeah.
I loved it. On Sunday nights, I would look forward to the week beginning, and you can't have a better, career that fits you like that.
You bet.
So, and it's true to what my perspective on the world is. It's how I see the world. Like this is righteous. This is honorable.
So are you comfortable talking a little bit about that piece? Not that necessarily righteous and honorable, although that too, but, and I could be completely wrong about this, but almost everyone I've met who goes into counseling and therapy, being a therapist, being a counselor, whatever, working with individual clients in that way, almost everyone I've met responds with sort of pushback or not receptive to something that would come out of my mouth like, well, there's some people who are just like really messed up. I mean, you can't just being in a healthy environment is not in and of itself going to change this person, right? I mean, some people will ruin that healthy environment. And so you just said this fits your orientation, this fits your perspective in a sort of a perfect way, right? So where'd that come from? I mean, you have that edge that's like,
So I'm comfortable.
And we can cut any of this out. So, whatever.
That's right. I'm comfortable talking about it, but I do want to finish responding to the other piece about do I miss it? Because I don't want to leave the impression that I loved it so much that I still want to be there. I am so happy to be retired.
Oh yeah, totally. Get that.
Love being retired. It's a blessing. It's wonderful. I miss the people.
Yeah.
I love being still connected. I, until recently, and I may do it again, was working with the probation chiefs and training probation officers and working with mentally ill offenders, do some webinars.
Right.
And then I'm doing some consulting. So I'm doing some work on mental health in correctional institutions.
Yeah.
I love being connected at the way I want to be connected. I do not miss having 50, 60, 70 hour a week job as chief. I thank my lucky stars that I ended up there and had that experience for a brief moment in time.
Yeah.
I was chief. I gave it everything I have. It gave me even more back. I loved it. But no, I don't want to be chief.
Yeah. Yeah.
So then,
well, so in some ways you don't, I mean, you wouldn't miss it. I'm not talking necessarily about the day to day, but it also sounds like given what you're doing, you've got enough experience and knowledge to be somebody that gets called in to sort of wrestle with some of the age-old challenges of being that weird place in the society that, everybody's walking along according to in the right lane, but there's always somebody that gets out of it. And what to do about that is really, and that's not going away. And you would think this is one of those things where, you'll excuse the expression, experience / wisdom plays a significant role because human beings are unique, and research can show one thing or another, but human beings are unique. And so it's always like, it feels like it's always something that will require a wrestling match. And I don't mean hostile between sides, but like, how do I make sense of this? How do we collectively make sense of this? So
it's rich, and there's so much there. There's so much to do. And in terms of, how does it fit me? Why does it fit me? If I go back and think about what the byline of forensic mental health is, and how that, in my mind, is similar to probation, and how it fits me, that the byline is, we want you to succeed. Work with an offender, right? With just somebody on probation. It's important to me that you succeed. I want that to happen, and I will work hard to make that happen. I will give you resources and time and energy, programs, and I will build a relationship with you. I want you to do well for you, but also for the people that you don't victimize down the road, right? But if you can't, or you don't, or you will not take advantage of this opportunity, I see it as my role, my responsibility to come in and intervene, increase the supervision, maybe highlight supervision, maybe incarcerate you in a hospital, a jail, or a prison. I have no problem doing that. It's a shame, and I'm sorry that you weren't able to take it, but I fully recognize it's up to you. We're going to do whatever we can to help you. It's up to you. And so that's just a perspective that you may call it tough love. That's some of what it's been called. A certain part of it is parental, right? That's how we deal with kids. It's like, I love you and I want to take care of you, but man, there's a line. There's a line.
Exactly.
Does that answer your question?
Totally. Did you ever meet anybody that you just wrote off? Like, it's just too much.
Yeah. I mean, when you're saying some people are just going to screw up the system or whatever. Yeah, some people you can't have. Some people are so badly damaged. Some people are evil.
Good. That's a good word.
Yeah.
I mean, it's a word I'm very comfortable with, because there's that sense that, well, what's evil? Well, I can show you some things that you could try to come up with a different word, but whatever that is, I'm not sure evil wouldn't do the trick just as well. There's some really bad stuff. So
some people
yeah.
are evil, and some people are just so ornery, even if they haven't committed that serious crimes. They just have this way about it, you know, all you don't want to be with, and that's tough. It makes it tough on their future because we all like to help people that we like. But yeah, no, there's, I mean, it's there's a range of folks, and thankfully, it's not a very high percentage fall into that. But you know, in terms of frankly, you think about what should punishment be? You think about the death penalty. That's controversial, of course. I happen to believe I'm comfortable with the notion that some people have done something so awful that they give up their right to live, and that the death penalty could be sentenced. However, the way it's done in this country, I don't think is fair, and so I don't support it in this country. It's done, but as a matter of principle, I could live with it, so to speak.
But like, that's so funny that this now circles back to my sort of earliest question. When they give up their right to live, is it because we can't rehabilitate them, or because they've done something so grotesque that they've, as a moral issue, they're done? We collectively as a society are deciding that the consequence of this action, not because we can't protect other people from you, and not because, but just because you did something really, we have to, because we wouldn't be the same people if we didn't. So which one? And, you don't have to answer that incredibly unfair question.
Are you asking for me what I come to it with, or
well, when you believe? No, you.
Yeah, for me, it's somebody has done something so heinous, so inexcusable.
Yeah,
that have crossed that line. So, what about you? I mean, you for the penalty?
I'm not. This is going to. Well, you know me. Well, you know me from way back. I'm crazier than I was then. Now
you're crazier now.
Oh, by far.
No.
To say, yeah, it's hard to imagine, right? I'm really uncomfortable with the state killing someone. I have no problem with, you're going to be in the worst situation in the world forever. But I want to see that as compassion. I would make it voluntary. You're never getting out of here. You get to choose. As much as I personally might want you to suffer for what you've done, and I know it's more expensive to keep you alive, although maybe not, given how many legal challenges there can be, but you get to choose. So you want to stay here for the next 40 years, or do you want us to, with as little amount of pain as possible, put you away?
Well, that's cute. That's a cute solution to
this problem. Yeah, I know it's not practical, but that's really how I feel. That would be humane.
I get that. I fully respect the notion that discomfort with the state doing that completely.
Yeah. And especially since you pointed out before, it's like there haven't been very many, at least that I've heard of. Maybe you've heard more. Well, you have, obviously, but systems, states, sovereigns that have instituted a death penalty well.
Yeah, exactly.
Right.
Exactly. I mean, could it be done? Who knows, right?
Right. Exactly.
Yeah.
Exactly. So it's like, okay, well,
And then
maybe we have the wrong guy. There's all kinds of reasons this person got here for whatever it is, blah, 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 all that stuff. And I don't mean, I probably am more flippant about it than I am, than I should be, but it's big. It's big to do that. It's big. It takes, and not, I'm not a religious person, so I don't have a story that somehow only God gets to, whatever that means. But only society gets to is also makes me really uncomfortable because we all are all so imperfect in all these different ways. So
yeah, and in some ways it gets to, we're talking about life and death. This is the kernel intensity of life, right? Being in the arena. I think one of the earliest things for me why the world of criminal justice was interesting was walking through an institution, a jail, a prison, and thinking that there are people in here that if they could, they would kill me to get out. Right? They're controlled against their will. They're locked up. It just, it still sends kind of chills. This is
totally. Yeah. Yeah, exactly.
Real stuff there. Real stuff.
Yeah. Well, if I were intelligent about all this, what would I have asked? Well, what would we be talking about that we haven't spoken about? I just have to say, and not because you're my friend, as knowing you as little as I do, if this conversation were the only conversation I have ever had with you, I think I would feel like, well, I'm really glad that you were one of the people in the position of having to wrestle with those unknowable, questions and challenges. So it's great. It's, and I think that big picture piece is, the thing that feels lacking in so many situations. And obviously it's something that you bring to that. So cool.
It's part of what makes it so rich. I mean, to deal with the nitty gritty, but also know how does this fit into the system? What's our role, right? And you see those big cycles, and it's just
yeah.
So if what you would have asked, or maybe what it's tough for me to talk up probation's importance any more than I already did, right? You can
well, but it is. It's such a real, because otherwise it's almost guaranteed that somebody's, only the exceptional human being is going to go through a system and not come back again, unless there's something supporting that person, whether it's a family or a counselor right? I mean, that's a disaster in a society unless there are an entity with lots of people in the position that you were in, or probation people are in. Otherwise, it's just like, hey, it's been real, it's been fun, but it hasn't been real fun. I hope not to see you again, and they're back.
Yeah. So what would you have asked? Well, one of the things that maybe I can ask you, but one of the things that we wrestle with in probation is, like you said, we fly below the radar, right? You're an educator. You had, I don't know, hundreds, thousands of kids you work with. How many of those kids said to you, when I grow up, I want to be a probation officer?
Yeah.
Right?
Yeah. Not a single. They may have turned out to be probation officers. They may even come from families where a family member was in probation, but I have never heard anyone say to me, hey, when I grow up, I want to be a probation officer.
Right. So and most of us who end up in the field end up accidentally, unless we have been on probation, know somebody, kind of thing. People say, I want to be a cop. I want to be a teacher.
Oh, absolutely. People people
So
have definitely said to me, I want to be a cop. Sure,
yeah,
absolutely.
right. So,
You guys,
chiefs.
you guys have bad PR. Like whoever's doing your
That's
marketing is
exactly
not.
right. That's exactly right. I mean, our people who go into probation, POs become, we're not, chiefs aren't elected. We're not like the DA or the sheriff who are out there promoting. And
Right.
honestly, we're officers of the court. So we try to take that more subdued role and respect. We're not good at promoting. And I know chiefs would love to find ways to promote more that way. And they try and they do it, but it's not a glamour profession. And
Yeah.
it's not that well known, below the radar. And usually we like it that way, right? I'd rather, when the DA does something stupid and gets in trouble, there's an article in the paper about them or something, and I get to go about my business.
You get to be stupid quietly.
Yeah, that's right. That's right. So, um,
Yeah.
That's
Is
one.
it a crowded field? I mean, is it difficult for people to get jobs in probation?
Not now. There have been times based upon county budgets and all, but not now. It's very difficult for probation departments to hire and retain. It's that way in a lot of different fields, of course.
Yeah.
Right?
Yeah.
It's tough. It's tough. So
Yeah.
that's one thing I would say is on our minds. I wish you had that could help me, figure out or help probation figure out how to do more with that. I think one thing that is of particular interest to me is, again, dealing with mentally ill offender, and the 5150 laws in California. Are you familiar with that? That's what allows police, hospitals to hospitalize somebody against their will.
Hold on. We're gonna have to say that again because of that sound that you didn't hear, but I did. So say it again. So the 5150 laws.
The laws tell you how we can hospitalize somebody against their will if they're a danger to themselves,
Right.
danger to somebody else, or gravely
Yeah.
disabled. There has been an effort many times over the years, and now recently again in California, to try to loosen it to allow us to take control of more people, who I think we should, because advocates, and God bless them, they are advocating for what they think is in the best interest of individuals who have mental illness and maybe are living on the street. But liberty sometimes should not be the highest value. I mean, some people are dying in their freedom, right, in the streets. There are ways that we can help, and so there's some effort to improve that. It has felt to me, feels to some people like, and there are new laws. They're working on how much teeth do they have, and it's a delicate balance. I mean, jail, or hospital, locking somebody up against their will, what a major thing to do. You
Well,
don't do
it's
that. Just like, I mean,
it's
my God,
in
my
some
God.
ways it's it's the basic. It's the basic. I mean, if there is one, it's the basic constitutional freedom. It's like,
Exactly right.
somebody restrains you, you ought to be able to say, wait a second, why do you get to do this?
Yeah.
Right. So that's the fundamental freedom. It's like, you
Absolutely.
better have some good reason, right? Better have a piece of paper. You better have a result. You better have some good reason that you get to, hold me. Yeah.
And then it can also go too far in the freedom area. There's
You bet.
sometimes when we have to take, I believe, a parental role,
Yeah.
and say, yes, we know better. We can help. You don't know what's best for you right now, and we think,
Yeah.
anyways. But how that should play out very carefully with obviously court involvement, and
Mm-hmm.
it's tough. But there are some efforts to allow a little bit more.
Yeah.
But that goes back to what you're saying before. the richness of these issues and the tension and the debate. It's forensic. There ought to be debate about this, right? I want people to have advocates and support them and say, you're not going to take away this person's freedom. Hell no, right? And fight that out.
Right.
And if it happens, it better damn well be after a tough process and really, really.
Yeah. Yeah.
But where is that balance?
Yeah. Your whole job was this.
That's right. That's a good way to think about that. That's how we think about probation, is that piece in the middle, that balance piece. And then when oftentimes we've always seen when people come up with new public policy, and sometimes they don't include probation either because they forget or they don't think we have a role.
Because nobody knows about probation officers.
Nobody knows, right. But even when
no one came to their school and said, you have a future in probation.
Well, it's like the board of supervisors, I don't know. But anyway, so when they come up with something, they come up with a new program and they don't include us. And then down the road, oftentimes it gets screwed up, and then the chief gets a call and say, hey, you don't have a role in this, but can you help fix this? Because probation's role is so central. It's a linchpin. It touches, there's no other part of the system that touches every other part like probation does.
Yeah.
And we connect people. I mean, law enforcement, the district attorney, the public defender, the jail,
mental health. I mean, it's just tons.
Social services, victims, families. We are in the middle of all of it. And so the role is so, like you say, it's rich. There's so many ways that we can be involved and connect. It's there ought to be more kids saying they want to be probation officers.
So let me end with this question that you just sort of asked me. Well, you said, did you ever meet any kid who said, I want to grow up to be a probation officer? Did you ever meet, well, other than the people who were incarcerated and then in the system, in the probation system, who wanted to work in the system as probation officers, did you ever meet people who kind of got there with a straight line? Like, when I grow up, I want to be a probation officer, and they did. Did you ever meet anybody like that?
Yes, I had some employees like that. It's unusual. It oftentimes comes from, again, they had a family member. Officer that had some connection, they saw and they got it. They saw this. That was often the case. Some you go in school and you study administration of justice. You learn about these different parts. Most not. It's unusual. It's rare. Yeah,
you bet. Well, Bob Ochs, thank you so much for being willing to have this conversation. I don't know about you, but I had fun and I learned a lot, which is good. So I appreciate it.